Welcome to Old Testament Study with Hillel and Rick, a Christian and a Jew, and we discuss Genesis from the beginning. We study it according from the Hebrew with thanks from Hillel, and I add in the Christian commentary. Thank you very much, and on with our broadcast.
All right, hey guys, this is Hillel, and I'm here with Rick, and we're going to continue our study of Genesis. Hope you enjoyed last week's study. This week, per Rick's request, I'm going to go over some of the rabbis that I've been quoting and give you a little background information on them so that you know who we're dealing with, and you'll know who I'm talking about. If you'll notice on the screen, I have four names: Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Rambam, and Ramban. And the reason I'm putting these four is these are the four that I'm going to be mostly dealing with. And the reason why is because the first three are the ones that the Ramban, the final one, usually references in his commentaries as he's going through. So I'm using the Ramban, the last guy on there. I'm using his commentary, primarily, but I'm also referring back to things like the Rambam's work and Rashi and Ibn Ezra. So these are all very important figures as far as commentaries and explaining the meaning of the Torah, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. And let me give you a little background information on them. So I started with Rashi because Rashi, as far as chronology goes, he's the oldest of them. He was born in 1040 on the secular calendar. And on the Jewish calendar, he was born in 4800. I don't know how many of you realize this, but the Jewish calendar goes according to the accounting of time in the Tanakh. So when we say 4,800 years, we're talking about 4,800 years since the creation of Adam.
Yeah, so
we count that time before.
We're up to 5,000 something, right? Since
5,782. We're at 5,782. We just did that with our last Rosh Hashanah, and that was back in about 3 months ago, I guess. 3 months or so ago, and we are in 5782. You guys, of course, we're in 2022. We just hit hit that number, and if you want to know the difference between them, just take 5782 and subtract 3,760 from it, and that gives you 2022. What happened to my screen all of a sudden?
I'll be back.
Something weird.
I'll get my mom to turn down the TV in the other room.
Oh, sure, no problem. For some reason, I don't know why, but my screen got weird on me. Hopefully that's not affecting anyone.
Mom, can you turn down the TV? Please.
Rick, did you hit a button or something that caused my... I don't see how you could cause my OBS to shrink, but something did.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, you can hear me. Did you hit a button or something just now?
I didn't.
Oh, I didn't either. That's very, very odd.
Why? What? Are you frozen or something?
No, my screen shrank in half suddenly. The whole OBS screen shrank in half.
Gee, that's weird. Unless you actually.
No, I got it back. I just went to studio mode and brought it back. Okay, so as I was saying, so if you want to find the year, then you would subtract 5,782. Subtract that by 3,760. If we're going in BCE time, which is before the year 1, then you're going to add those numbers together, and that'll give you the year that you're at. So it's kind of a little tricky until you get used to it. So he was born in 1040, and I'll mostly stick with the secular date because I think that's easier for us all to keep hold of. He was born almost 1,000 years ago. He was born almost 1,000 years ago, and he died in 1105. So he was about 65 when he passed away.
Cool.
Which is pretty good age. He saw a lot of action. He actually lived through, I believe it was the First Crusade. Yep, the first crusade. He lived through the period of the first crusade. And actually, at the time that Rashi lived, France was actually a pretty good haven for Jews. Jews were actually going through their golden age in France at the time. They got along pretty well with their Christian neighbors. But with the start of the crusade, that all changed. They were forced. They had. There's a story that, and I don't remember the person's name, but there was a person who was leading a crusade, and he came through, and he had heard about Rashi and his great ability, and he wanted for Rashi to tell him what was going to happen when he returned back alive, yada yada. And Rashi didn't really want to say anything, but he finally said, only you will come back, and you'll die before you enter through the gate. And the guy went to the crusade, and all of his soldiers were killed, and he came back, and he died as he was coming to the gate to kill Rashi because he was upset. That's a story about that. I don't know if it's true or not.
Interesting.
But
is that the gate for Jerusalem or somewhere else?
No, he was in France.
Okay.
And at that time, I want to say he was in Provence, France. At that time, let's see here. Rashi died in 1105. He died on the 29th in Troyes. He died in Troyes, France. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Forgive my French. This time we're not talking about curse words. I'm talking, actual French. I don't know how they're saying this. He died on the 29th of Tammuz, and where he was born. He was born in Troyes, and he died in Troyes. So what's so amazing about Rashi? Well, Jewish history, we split it up into different eras. And the era before his was the Gaonic period. And Gaon is I think it's a Spanish word that means genius. The Gaonim were like the generation, one or two generations after the close of the Talmudic period, when they finished composing the Talmud. So it's about 500 years. About 500 years.
Is each era about 500 years, or does it vary?
It might vary. I haven't really split up the time frames. I didn't really look at that. It occurs to me that maybe I should have, but yeah, it's
no problem.
There are lots of questions to be asked, and I guess I can't prepare for all of them.
Yeah.
But
who knows what I'll think of?
Right. So you have the Talmudic period, and then you have the Savarai, and then you have the Gaonim, and then you have what are called the Rishonim. Rishonim is the period where we have all the commentators like Rashi and Ibn Ezra, Rambam, and Ramban.
So would these periods be after the completion of what I would call the Old Testament? All your main holy books? Like the prophets. So after I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right time frame. Well, all the books before any books before Christ, because I don't think there was any. You guys have anything that was written before Scripture after Christ? I think everything you have.
You're familiar.
I could be wrong.
You're familiar with the fact that the Catholics had. They like to have the book of Maccabees 1 and 2, and Enoch and different things like that. And then there are definitely lots of writings that we have around this time, and we have the writings of Josephus, but we don't have any holy books, for example. So let's just take you with what we call the Torah. The Torah is split up into 3 sections, and Torah actually it represents those 3 sections. So the T in Tanakh stands for Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, and the N stands for Nevi'im, and that means prophets. So you have everything from judges to I think Micah. It ends with Micah there.
Judges is part of the prophets for you?
What's that?
I said judges is part of the prophets for you?
Sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. We don't consider them part of the prophets.
Yeah, it's it's interesting because First and Second Kings is part of the prophets, but First and Second Chronicles is part of the writings, and that's what the kaf at the end of Tanakh means. It means ketuvim, which is writings, and or ketuvim, and so you have in the writings, you have books such as Psalms and Proverbs and Ruth and Daniel and all those, and the difference between the
Daniel we have in the prophets.
Right, we don't have Daniel in the prophets, and here's the difference: Daniel was a prophet himself, but to be in the section of prophets in the Tanakh, your message had to be something that resonated every generation going forward. So even though you might say that Daniel had some prophecies that are recorded in the book of Daniel, it wasn't necessarily things that were going to be completely relevant up until the coming of the Messiah. And so Daniel goes into the ketuvim, he goes into the writings. Ruth the same way. Ruth is more like telling you what's going on. It's not really a book of prophets.
Yeah.
Esther, Esther was written, and it was written after the right before the Jews came back to Israel, and we actually have the generation of the men of the Great Assembly.
Now, coming back to Israel, you mean like in Old Testament times, not like 50 years ago, right? Obviously.
Yeah, this was called the Second Temple period. When the Jews returned they were exiled by the Babylonians, and they were in exile for 70 years. They came back 70 years later, and the Medians.
Esther is God's not mentioned in it at all.
Right. Yeah, and that's because without getting on too many rabbit trails, that's because the idea in Esther is to show that God is hidden, but that his presence is still there, even whenever you don't specifically see him or refer to him. His presence is always there, hidden behind the scenes. And in fact, the word for hidden is alayim, which is the same root it shares with the word olam, which is world. The world hides God's presence because we need God's presence to be hidden so that we can have free will. And I think I touched on that a little bit. We can probably touch on that more going forward.
Yeah.
But during this period of time, so this is about 300 or 400 years before the Common Era, that the Jews come back. And then we get into everything with the Greeks and then the Romans, and then we lose the kingdom again, and we face in some ways even a more severe exile, because it has gone on until about 70 years ago.
Yeah, about 2,000 years. Just
almost 2,000 years, right? I mean, if you look at it technically, it's not been quite like you have to decide when was it really the exile. Was like
I know.
The large majority of people were exiled.
I know. I think the fall of Jerusalem was like 70 or 40 AD.
It was about on our calendar. It was about 68 CE. But then you also had still the majority of the population was there, and in 128 we have the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Bar Kokhba was believed by many to actually be the Mashiach, the Messiah. But then he ended up, I believe, died in battle, and so we knew he wasn't the Messiah. And so then after that, the Romans were even stricter with us. So there was a period of time where the state sort of lingered on, limped on. And one of the reasons that they thought he was the Messiah was because he'd actually been able to eject Roman forces and printed his own money, which hadn't happened in a long time. So there were a lot of different signs like that made some rabbis think that. But it turned out he wasn't the Messiah, and so we went into a full exile. Not to say there weren't Jews still there. There have always been Jews.
Yeah, I get
Israel.
you. Just there was a remnant, for lack of a better word. There.
Right, there's a remnant there, and that's always been there, and so we've maintained a presence, even though it's like very, very small. But it was there throughout the exile. When we came back to Israel, there were Jews here. There weren't a lot. There wasn't a lot of anybody here, actually. There weren't very many Muslims. There are Muslim Christians and Jews here when the Jews started making their way back in the late 19th century. But the Jewish population was actually bigger than the combined Christian and Muslim population until the Turkish government, the Ottoman Empire, started bringing more Arabs and Muslims from surrounding countries into Israel to increase the population. But and if you want to know where that is, there's two books you can look at. One is by Joan Peters, and it's called From Time Immemorial. And then Benjamin Netanyahu wrote a book called A Place Among the Nations, and he shares a lot of the same information, but it's a much more condensed version of the book. I think Peter's book, it's out of print, so you'd have to find it. I think you can still get Netanyahu's book.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
And you might even be able to find these books digitalized, maybe.
I don't know. If you find it, let me know. I have an old, broken version of Peter's book.
You'll have to maybe send me that names in a DM at some point.
Sure.
Because I won't remember them, and
you have a video here.
That are coming back to this.
Right, and we might bring it up again in the future. But anyway, so you have with the period of the Rishonim. Remember, last week we covered that the Rosh means head. It can also mean beginning, and in this case, Rishonim means the early ones.
Oh yeah.
So they come after the Gaonic period, which is the time of the geniuses, and the Gaonic period was mainly noted for being a time when they were you had a lot of grammarians who were going over the text. Rashi becomes like one of the last of these great grammarians, and he's sort of one of those people who's on the fence. He sort of has he's almost like literally the period of Rishonim seems to start with his birth. So he's a very important figure, and what makes him important is he had a lot of things that we don't have now, a lot of texts that we don't have now. Yeah. As far as like older versions of it, he had
stuff that was closer to the original text,
right?
The original scroll.
Well, yeah. We had we used to have more to the Talmud than we have today, but a lot of the Christians at the time had Jewish I don't know how to say it politely, but Jewish traders who had converted to Christianity and then sold everybody out. And they claimed that there were a lot of things that were offensive to Christianity in the Talmud, and that and so the Catholics went and burned a lot of the Talmud, and so we lost a lot of them.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it would go a lot against a bunch of Catholic beliefs, shall we say, doctrine.
Well,
which doesn't necessarily line up with, I would say, New Testament scripture.
Well, the problems that the Jewish people had with the Catholic Church, it wasn't always that the claims were legitimate. Sometimes it was these these apostates who converted, who for whatever reason, whether it was a power grab or it was to demonstrate their loyalty or something, they made claims against the Talmud that wasn't always true.
Yeah.
We don't know how much material, if any, talked about Jesus in the Talmud. We have a few passages. Some people talk about Jesus, but I don't think it's about him. Maybe there's some things in there talk about the disciples, but it doesn't really talk about Jesus himself, because the instances they refer to were either 200 years before he was supposed to have existed or 200 years afterwards. So, at any rate, so in this period, Rashi, even despite the persecutions and things, had access to more complete versions of the Talmud. A lot of the stuff that we lost wasn't really relevant to our keeping halakha and Jewish law.
Well, and
it was really more
sorry, just for those who might not know, what is the Talmud exactly?
Sure. The Talmud is a book that contains a lot of our oral communications with God. So Judaism is different from Christianity in that we don't only claim to have a written tradition, but we also claim to have an oral tradition as well. So we say that when God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, that some of the things that God said, Moses wrote down, and some of it he didn't write down. He just passed it on orally. So an example of this would be how to slaughter animals. So God says to the children of Israel, you should slaughter these animals after the manner that I've shown you. But you go back in Scripture and you go, there are no details on how you should slaughter an animal properly. Well, because that doesn't belong with the written tradition. It belongs to the oral tradition.
Yeah.
Pronunciation of Hebrew is part of the oral tradition. A lot of fundamental aspects of Judaism and Hebrew and everything we know by way of our oral tradition. So the Talmud is composed of two books. One's called the Mishnah, the other one's called the Gemara. The Mishnah is much older. A lot of the things you find in there, they'll date to about the period that you might say that Jesus existed, to give you a framework.
Uh-huh.
These were sayings that were gathered by Yehuda Anasi, Judah the Prince, and he was important. He was a descendant of Rabbi Hillel and the Rabbi Hillels and the Rabbi Gamliels, and he became the exarch of the Jews so he gathered these things together, and those were the basis for the Mishnah, and these are mostly segments of law that he has there. It's pretty much like laws. These are laws. Most of them is a lot of it's laws from Sinai. Some of it is like conclusions of the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin was the political body of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
It has the 71 elders, and the 71
there
elders.
Was, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees. I think there was another sect.
Right. So the Sanhedrin was an interesting body. During a lot of the time prior to the beginning of the Common Era, and even probably part of it, the Pharisees had two groups, and you had the group of Beit Hillel and the group of Beit Shammai, and they were I think they were the last of the Zugim, which means pairs. I didn't know I was going to be going this far back, but there's a lot of information. You might listen to this.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think of a question to ask.
Well, you have to forgive me if I get something wrong. Just know that I'm this is all off the top of my head. I wasn't expecting to talk about this, so
yeah,
no problem. I'm trying to make sure that I'm telling you things correctly.
It's going to give people a lot of back information going forward. Sure. That they'll know all this, and even I think it should all be useful what we're talking about, and or what you're telling us, going forward, at some point, you can point back to.
Well, it'll right. Well, it'll give you a better frame of reference from where I'm coming from when I talk about things. Like
Yeah.
when we get into these commentaries, these Jewish commentaries, they're not just. It's not just a word study. It's not just a grammar study. There's a lot of things that go into this.
Yeah.
So so back in with the Mishnah, so you have the Mishnah, and Yehuda Hanavi was about 200 BE. Let me see if I can give you. I went too far. I've got a book here, in case anybody's wondering. I'm flipping through a book called the Codex Judaica. It's a chronological index of Jewish history. So it goes from the year 1 with the creation of Adam to the year 5,764. And so we're in 5782. So this is almost 20 years old. So up to about 20 years ago. So it'd be 2002, good. I guess.
I bet that book's really thick.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, it's not as thick as I would have thought, but
no, well, very. They're pretty concise in some ways. So let me see if I can get over here.
The Strong's Concordance is bigger than that. And
that's true. Like it's not exhaustive. It's covering the major points, the major issues that happen in Jewish history. So the elders translated the Torah into Greek. Matisyahu, name. It's a Micah period. I just want to give you a framework.
Yeah.
The Great Assembly. These is the next section here. I wasn't expecting to go all the way back to this full period of time, so I want to give you a couple of years of reference.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay,
this is really different than your last time going through this, eh?
Yes. So here we have Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi completed the Mishnah around 189 of the Common Era. So that was when he finished the Mishnah. And what he did was he went around, he collected already written texts, and he found the best ones and put them together.
Yeah.
Bar Kokhba, I told you 128 was Bar Kokhba. I think that's on a secular date line, but in Jewish history it was in 133. Okay, so we get into the Gemara, the period of the Gemara, and that starts getting composed, and it is in the Talmud isn't completed until 475 CE. So it has about almost 300 years. Not 300. About 200 years or so that the Talmud is being composed. So, or the Gemara is being composed.
Yeah,
so the Mishnah,
and they're basically composing. That's just composing, writing down all the oral traditions.
Well, the Gemara is different than the Mishnah, and the Mishnah isn't exhaustive on the oral tradition. Like outside of the Mishnah, you also have you've got the mystical stuff that's only taught from teacher to student. What you call Kabbalah. All Kabbalah means is like transmission.
Yeah.
Like if I want to, if I go to a restaurant and I want to pay for my meal, I ask for the Kabbalah. I'm not asking to start to create a golem or anything like that. I'm just asking to know what my bill is. My receipt. I want my receipt.
You're asking for the receipt to put your debit card in.
Right. So I'm just asking for my receipt when I ask for the Kabbalah. So
you could almost call the internet a Kabbalah.
Well, because you're receiving information. Sure, yeah. It's a general term. It means a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So, but the point is that Kabbalah stuck with it because over the years we've sort of keep writing stuff down. We keep turning oral tradition into converting to written tradition. because we face some disasters as a people.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we preserve those traditions. But you also have, in all of this, you have the Midrashes, and the Midrashes have stories and anecdotes and what do you call them? You have them in the New Testament.
Parables?
Those stories they tell sometimes. Parables. Yeah, thank you. Parables and all sorts of things.
We probably, as Christians, we probably started with a lot of that oral stuff, but as the Gentiles took over, it probably went to the wayside a bunch of it.
Well, as far as I understand, some of the debates that Jesus engages in with other Jews, with the Pharisees, are actually arguments of Jewish law, and I think Christians take it as being they were arguing over spiritual and theological matters, but they were actually making arguments over Jewish law.
Yeah.
I think some of the ones I could think about is the, let me think here, the thing with the bread, right? It was Shabbat, and they were hungry, and they wanted the bread from the temple.
I know what you're talking about. The disciples grabbed. It was on Shabbat. The disciples grabbed some grain, from the outer layer that's left, for foreigners and stuff like that. The poor, they grabbed it on a Shabbat to eat, and Jesus said.
So they're picking, they're harvesting. Okay. Yeah. Oh, but he brought in a comparison with David, who was on the run.
Yeah. He said, "Did not even David, eat the holy bread, or right. the bread that was."
I read a book a number of years ago called Jesus the Pharisee, and it covered on some of those points. It was pretty interesting. I don't really. It's been like 20 years since I've read it. 10, 20 years since I've read it. But so I'm trying to pick this stuff out of my long-term memory here.
Yeah, well, I figured out which. I'm pretty sure I figured out exactly what you're talking about, And he was saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Did I say that right?
Right, and I think that something like that. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. Like in some ways, some of the things that I guess in points like that, I think there was obvious agreement. Like for example, if you can violate the Sabbath anytime a person's life is in jeopardy. There's not a problem about violating because you have to preserve it. It's more because it says in Leviticus that you should live by the laws. So the rabbis focused said live, not die. So with the exception of three things, you are allowed to break the law and save your life, unless they're trying to get you to do something publicly, then it becomes an issue. At any rate, I don't know why I got on that digression, but as you do. But anyway, so you have the Talmudic period. It ends just prior. It's like the 5th century CE, and then you go into a period of time when then you're getting into the Savarim and the Gaonic period. And then we come back after these periods of time, and we wind up where we are in Rashi's era, in the period of the Rishonim. Today we're in the period of the Achronim, which means the later sages or later elders or whatever you want to say. And although there's some discussion about whether we've entered another era, possibly the era of the Mashiach, so we're all, Bezrat Hashem, we'll be seeing that soon. So the Rishonim with Rashi begins in 1040. It's Rabbeinu Gershom ben Yehuda. He dies, and he dies in Mainz, Germany. And I believe that Rashi might have been a student of his. He was a prolific scribe who copied accurate versions of many works and composed some piyutim. He is most remembered for his chamim bans and takanot enactments, particularly the one for monogamy. So this is when the Jews were polygamous up until him, and he enacted a ban. For 1,000 years, Jews had to be monogamous. If you're like Ashkenazi, if you came from like Europe and places like that. the ban didn't apply to the Jews around the Mediterranean, or the Yemenites or others. And the main reason that he did the ban was because the Christians were monogamous, and it was causing problems for us with our neighbors. So this sort of helped get us around a lot of the problems that we were having.
Yeah.
So the ban ran out.
We know David had like 10 wives. I think Solomon will.
18. We had 18 altogether. 18 maybe wives and what do they call it? Polygashim, concubines.
And
he
then
had a combination of 18 wives and concubines. And then Solomon just lost his mind and just got like 900 or something.
Yeah, I think
which is forbidden by the Torah.
Between the concubines and the wives, it equals like somewhere near 1,000.
But he did it for political reasons.
Yeah.
It made
political.
It made like a lot of sense politically, but the Torah forbids it. King's not supposed to have beyond 18, and he did that. But the whole purpose, so this ban of not having the polygamous relationships for Jews from Eastern Europe ran out, I think 10, 20 years ago. And but we're not out getting more wives. I don't understand how they could handle more than one wife, honestly.
Because, it's probably it's such an investment part of your culture now of just one wife that
there were rules that went along with it. If you had more than one wife, you had to treat them both equally. You had to provide for them equally. One couldn't have a better apartment than the other one. You couldn't give less money to the other one to support it. There are a lot of areas where they had to be the first, and also you couldn't treat the children differently. Like even if one of the wives you didn't like her so much, and you couldn't give the ones you liked more clothes or more money or things like that.
I wonder where they get that idea to make sure that's equal. Joseph and the coat of many colors, and Rachel and Leah arguing.
Well, it's in the Torah, yeah. But the thing is that what we see if you look at the Hebrew scriptures is that usually when polygamy is involved, things all usually end up in disaster at some point.
Yeah.
You can look at. Look at you had Lamech.
Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, wives. And Jacob.
Isaac didn't have a second wife, but yeah, Jacob. He had a whole mess with the two sisters, and then their
all the kids.
For tradition were also their sisters, but probably from different mothers or something. You look at King David. He had two sons who rebelled against him.
Yeah.
So it was a big problem.
One that was nasty towards his sister, shall we say?
Right. Exactly. And yeah. And so there's a lot of issues with it. And part of the whole reason for having polygamous relationships was to ensure the survival of the populace.
Yeah.
But look, there's about 10 or 11. Well, there's more than that. Closer to 20 million Jews in the world.
Oh, cool.
And so that's from everywhere. And but yeah. So anyway, that was just sort of a side trail. I'm sure everybody found that really interesting. Yeah, we don't do polygamy.
Yeah.
It's not because it's a sin. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We don't do polygamy because polygamy in itself is a sin. We don't do it because
that's
at a time it was a threat. But go ahead.
When I read the Levitical Law, because I have went through Leviticus, I was surprised. And if I'm right, I know it says do not commit adultery in there, and I'm not sure whether fornication would be the same thing as adultery in wording or whatever in Jewish culture. It doesn't even say about not fornicating in the scriptures. It just says do not commit adultery. So
I don't know what fornicating. I don't know what the word fornicate means.
It just means sex outside of marriage.
Okay, well,
like say I went and found another single girl and we had sex. That's fornication.
Well,
She's
actually,
not married.
in the
I'm
Jewish,
not married.
right. So look, that's a definition of a pelagish. Like if a pelagish is someone, it would be for a Jew, a pelagish is someone he enters into a relationship without a document of marriage. So to be married, it's a two-step process. Part one is you have to give a certain amount of something had to have certain value, and that was representing the relationship. You're sort of forming a contract, and you had to have a document, and that with the document and the thing that was worth something, a ring or money or
sort
whatever.
Of like what I think Jacob did. The 7 years for. Well, he thought it was Rachel at first, but it was Leah, and then another 7 years for Rachel.
Right. Sure, you could, but the amount of money that you have to give is actually can be what's called less than a pruta. And the Talmud talking about being less than a pruta. What's a pruta? Pruta is like worth less than a penny, and it's like a symbolic amount, really.
Yeah.
But if you don't do the document in the amount, then you have a pelagish relationship, and it's sort of like. If she's dissatisfied and she wants to leave, she can leave, and she can go out and marry someone else or have another pelagish relationship with them, and she's not committing a sin. Whereas once you get married, then if the woman left the relationship, then she would actually be committing adultery if she had another relationship outside of that marriage until she got a get. And it's interesting that the Torah tells us that a person who gets if somebody wants to get divorced, right? They have to have a document, but it never tells it. But because we have to have a document to get divorced, that's where we also know that we have to have a document to get married.
Yeah,
that's getting married. Now that for non-Jews is a different situation altogether. Yeah. Non-Jew doesn't have to. Non-Jew a marriage contract doesn't apply because non-Jews were not commanded to have marriage contracts. So their relationships are based on the intention of being together, and so in your scenario, the two of you are together. You're considered married. So being together is your act of marriage, which is what we see with Isaac and Rebecca. He took her into his tent and was consoled because of his mother. So there we see an example of that kind of relationship with the patriarchs. So there are differences in the requirements for non-Jews and Jews in certain areas. Anything considered idolatry for a Jew is also considered idolatry for non-Jews. So this touches upon the idea of the 7 laws of Noah. We'll get into that more later on. As
we've gone off under a
Adam.
Huge.
This thing's called Rabbis in Genesis 1:5. Obviously, we're not getting to Genesis 1:5 tonight. So I'm just preparing.
We'll be lucky to get through the Rabbis.
All right. So let me bring this all back. So now we're in the period of the Rishonim with Rashi. So Rashi's big contribution is that he wrote a commentary on the entire Tanakh. All the books of the Tanakh have commentary by Rashi. And now, when I say commentary, I don't mean he said, well, I looked up in this book I found over here and these are archaeological remains and yada, yada, yada. It means that he took all of his knowledge of Judaism. He took the Tanakh. He took the Talmud. He took the Midrashim. He took maybe even some more mystical knowledge sometimes. He took all his knowledge of the entire span of Jewish learning that he knew in his day up to his day. He knew pretty much, you couldn't find a better person who knew more than Rashi. And he took all that, and that's what he used to write his commentary with. It's extremely deep. It's an amazing, and you don't read it like, I think in modern commentaries. A modern commentary says, and so-and-so did such and such. And you look down in the footnote and it says, 500 years ago, people would do such and such. And this, no, it's like he will launch into immediately, and you have to know what he's what he's talking about. I don't have a Rashi with me right now.
He'd be
But
one
anyway,
to think about all the rabbit trails.
yeah. Well, they're not, but they're very concise. They're extremely concise, and it's very hard to read it because they're so concise. You have to have a lot of knowledge yourself. That's why it turns out people in following generations would write commentaries in Rashi's commentary because he has such a deep. They're so deep, and sometimes people don't really understand. Well, what is his point here? And they have to go in and they say, it's like there's a modern book called "What's Bothering Rashi," right? What's bothering Rashi? Rashi only comments when something's bugging him about the text. And I told you, when we got into Genesis 1:1 and we got in this whole discussion of what the word Bereshit means, well, Rashi's the one who starts this whole thing off. He starts the whole thing off and he says, why are we starting here in Bereshit when, if the Torah is a book of laws for the Jewish people, and that's the main focus of it, then we should start in Exodus 12:2, I think it is, with the giving of the commandment of the new moons. But no, we've started here. What's God's point? Why are these strange stories? So Rashi starts us off, and he asks those kinds of questions that sometimes you're not even expecting to ask.
Yeah.
And so he gives his answers on these things. Now, Rashi was sort of the granddaddy of the commentators during the Rishonim period, but you had other rabbis who lived at the same time who were doing commentaries of their own. Of course, we've always had commentaries in one form or another. We had Targum Yonatan or Onkelos. Onkelos was actually a convert to Judaism, and he lived in the 2nd century, I think, 1st or 2nd century CE. And he wrote a Targum is a translation. He wrote a translation of the Torah, maybe the entire Tanakh, from Hebrew into Aramaic. And all these guys, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Ramban, they refer back to his Targum, his translation, because it's like a commentary. Sometimes when they want to know or they want to compare their interpretation, they'll look at Targum Onkelos and they'll say, see how Onkelos translates it here. He did it right. Rambam usually will agree with him. He says, and Onkelos said this, and that's right on. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So Rashi takes all this information and he puts it down. And then not only does he make a commentary on the Tanakh, but he also goes on and does one on the Talmud. Unfortunately, he passed away before he finished his translation or his commentary on the Talmud. But we find his commentary in every tract of the Talmud that you find. Maybe sometime I'll show you what a Talmud page looks like, but it's very interesting. We're used to, I read something and there are footnotes at the bottom, or there are endnotes at the back of the book. But actually, the commentary that we have surrounds the text it's commenting on, almost like it's very visual. It's very interesting looking. It looks like you got like a kernel right here, and then kind of around the sides, it's almost like a shell that goes around it. And Rashi is there. And opposite Rashi is the Tosafot, and they are mostly the grandchildren of Rashi, and they oftentimes will disagree with their grandfather. They'll read his commentary and they'll say, Baba,
Granddad was so wrong.
Granddad, what are you doing? And this is what it is. And Rabbeinu Tam, which is like one of his most well-known children, he almost disagrees with Rashi entirely. I mean, all the time. And but it's great. That's the kind of thing you have in Judaism. Is you have this idea where you're allowed to ask questions, and the fact it's praiseworthy to ask questions and challenge to understand.
As the scripture says, come, let us reason together.
Right, you mentioned that last week, exactly. So, and we reason together, and we go through, and look, it's funny being in a learning in a Beit Midrash, which is a house of study, or in yeshiva or anything else where you're studying across from somebody, and you're giving each other the stink eye because you do not like what the other person is saying, but you're getting through that text, and a lot of times when I study with my friends, with my chavrutas, chavruta means like a friend study partner. I mean, sometimes neither one of us will relent in our position. But it's good because it forces us to look at it more carefully.
Yeah,
And I just love it. I just love the studies that I get to do it like that. So Rashi has established this amazing model of doing commentaries, and we rely on Rashi a great deal. It's almost impossible to get through the Tanakh and the Talmud without referencing Rashi, because he really you have to understand that if you were to take Shakespeare and read it in the original English, it'd be very hard to understand what is being said. Yeah. In fact, my kids today, they're fluent in Hebrew, and they're more fluent, a lot more fluent than I am in modern Hebrew. But when it comes to understanding the Torah, I'm much better than them at that, because I understand the biblical Hebrew much better than I do modern Hebrew.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll go, so what does this word mean? And they'll go, I don't know. Well, I said, wait a second, you're the one who speaks fluent Hebrew. How do you not know what this word is? This is a simple word. You see it all the time. I don't know, Abba. What do you want from me? So I had to break it down for them then. And so just imagine, so we're dealing with documents and writings that are spanning all of Jewish history from 3,300 years ago. Starting 3,300 years ago, coming up to the present. You're going to have these changes in dialects. You're going to have these changes in the way we understand words. You can, for example, you can go through the Talmud, and you can see a term sometimes, and the term means something slightly different depending on what era you're in the Talmud, who's saying it, or the Mishnah, or how we use it today.
Yeah.
So it becomes a point where you almost become reliant on Rashi and other commentators to help you, give you kind of a boost to help you understand what's going on.
Give you a sort of cultural context. It's
or even a technical context. Yeah. Even a technical context.
It almost makes me think of the one. There's a verse in the probably the King James. It says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." Now, Christ saying that, and it's like, does he mean for the kids to suffer? Like, oh, I got this pain. No, it's, in the King James, it means permit. Allow them to come to me,
Right.
The language our language has changed so much from the King James, Now the word suffer means suffer with some sort of pain or whatever usually. Or then it meant more like permit.
There's so many changes in cultural meanings of words for kids today versus when I grew up.
Oh yeah,
I remember.
Just the one, a really main one is the word gay. Like 100 years ago, that word meant happy. Now it means
right.
Now it means anything but happy. Well, I don't know whether.
Michael Scott from The Office said, when he grew up, it meant lame. So it's gone through a couple of transitions there, but there are a lot of words like that. And even in the last 20 years, since you've got these emojis where we're regressing in language, we're going from letters back to pictorial representation of meanings, and we got away from that because the nuance wasn't available in symbolic language, and it was, symbolic, like iconic language, I guess you could call it. And forgive me for any of those of you out there who are actually studying these fields that I don't know what the correct terminology is, the jargon, but I'm calling it what I call it.
The emojis, the pictorial. The thing is now with the computers, you can have 7 zillion of them, and so you can get the nuance, compared to the guy trying to, scribble on a cave or on a.
I don't get it. I'll have somebody they'll write to me, and I'll see they'll have 6 or 7 emojis on there. I go, what does that mean? Clapping hands, something's on fire. I don't know. What do you? Clapping somebody's on fire. What's going on? I don't know. Yeah, I don't even bother. I'm like, I think I'm too old to care. You get a certain age where you're like, I don't care anymore. You guys you go over there and talk your gibberish. But anyway, I I don't think I'm that old, but you know.
Oh, we're not that old. I think you're
Shooters.
close to my age.
Shooters. But anyway, so Rashi is very important, and he's also the last of the grammarians, these people who pay so much attention to grammar, and that's why his a lot of his commentary in the first line of Genesis involves him examining the grammar and language of Hebrew, and he talks about that when he's trying to answer the question.
Yeah.
Come in later on, and let me go ahead and I want to get to his page so I can tell you when he is.
Hello. I'm not sure how long you want to go, but it's like we've been at this about 54 minutes.
Okay. Let me. It's up to you. I right now I'm sort of on a roll.
As long as you like. I'm just trying to respect your time. You know, like how far into the next rabbi do we want to get? How long will it take? You know, how many rabbit holes will we go down? Rabbit trails.
I'll try to summarize this much quicker since I've given such a big.
I know we're trying to study Genesis, but I'm also good for if you want to try and get the other two in next week too. You know, I'm just giving you options. You know.
Thank you. Well, I'm sort of like a dog with a bone right now. So.
Okay. No problem. No problem.
Let's see here. Abraham. Here you go. Even Ezra 11:58. Okay. So, probably too far. The next person I'm going to talk about is Ibn Ezra. He's actually Avram Ibn Ezra. There's a couple of Ibn Ezras that are important, but he's the one that Ramban talks a lot about his commentary. He's usually the one that Ramban likes to pick a fight with.
Did they live during the same time?
No.
Well, there's some overlap. Fight with somebody that's dead. That's no fair.
It happens all the time.
They can't answer back. That's an unfair match. Picking a fight with somebody who's dead.
So Ibn Ezra was born about 1089, and let's see here. So Rashi died in 1105, and so
those two
he was only
about overlapped a little then.
Well, he's about 6 years old when Rashi passed away. So he was sort of like he was the generation after one or two generations after Rashi, and he writes his own commentary on the Torah, and so we have Meir Ibn Ezra dies in 1164. Talks about he talked to Rabbeinu Tam, who was Rashi's grandson. So he was big because he wrote this commentary on the Torah that I think tends towards rationalism, more of a rationalistic interpretation.
Versus a philosopher, which it sounds like Rashi was.
Well, no, Rashi wasn't really a philosopher. Philosophy wasn't really in his line of sight. With Ibn Ezra and Rambam, philosophy is more of a thing for them.
Well, I was just thinking with the statement of the beginning thing, and it sounded like a bit of philosophy in there. I think that's
Well, no,
why would should we start here instead of there?
Well, when I say it's not philosophy, what I mean is that it's not Aristotelian. It's not Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
You look at Eastern thinking, like Taoism and Confucianism, and those contain like philosophy, but not Greek philosophy. It's very
Yeah.
different. And for him, really, he's trying to solve a puzzle. And the question he gets is not a question he asks originally. He takes it sort of from the Talmud. Some say he attributed the question from his father, who was whoever he was getting from it. It's definitely something in the Talmud that the Talmud mentions it. So Rashi seems to pose it as a question. Ibn Ezra is his junior, and he is more of a rationalist. Rambam, who is a junior to Ibn Ezra and Rashi, he is he's really well known for his mixture of using Greek philosophy in his explanations, because it's the intellectual language of the day. Greek philosophy is. You can't express yourself intelligently without it. And Ramban uses that. So during his I think I want to say this, make this statement, then we can get off. The Ramban uses his knowledge of Greek philosophy and Greek thinking, and he uses that in the beginning of his Genesis commentary. He talks about heaven and earth being the two things that are created from nothing, and he says the substance that they are created is called Hule, Hule in English, and I don't know what it is in Greek, but he takes it from there because he says there isn't a Hebrew word that expresses the substance of what heaven and earth was that was created from nothing. Heaven and earth are in Genesis 1:1 are terms that are very different from how they're used later on. Like when you talk about heavens, you're talking about something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you read later on, heaven sounds more like the sky, whereas this is everything. Yeah. And earth starts off as the substance, and then it winds up it's one of this whatever the earth was before God started letting everything be and becoming referred to what you refer to like land. Later on, it refers to like national territories and things like that.
Yeah, I know in Christian theology, there's like three heavens. Our atmosphere is one heaven, space is the next, and then God's throne room is the third.
I think there's seven heavens. Wasn't there a TV show called Seven Heavens?
Seventh heaven. That was about a
seventh heaven.
That was about a pastor and his family. And it was called Seventh Heaven because there was him, his wife, and 5 kids.
Okay.
At first.
It has no theological bearing, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can continue this next week if you want to. I don't.
Oh really... yeah, for sure.
Okay. We'll try to conclude next week with Ibn Ezra, Rambam, and Ramban. I only got up to Rashi. That's Rick's fault. Don't blame me.
I'll take it.
That wasn't my fault.
I asked too many questions.
I was trying to get done. I was like, I got this nailed. I know exactly what to say. I'll get right through it. And Rick messed the whole thing up.
Yeah, I asked too many questions. Right?
That's okay. That's good. That's good in Judaism. We appreciate that.
And then, of course, we traveled down way too many rabbit trails without the questions.
Well, because everything that you answering certain questions, you have to go back and establish the basis for that answer that question.
Yeah.
So when you started asking me about what's the Tanakh and then what's this and what's that, and this is what this is with that. So I should have known better. I should have known we wind up back there, because if not because of you, because of my own tendency to I don't know if this is the philosopher in me or if this is the Jew in me, but my own tendency to it could be both. The Greeks referred to, or maybe it was Plato referred to the Jews as a nation of philosophers, and which is for Greek, that's a really good compliment.
Yeah.
Well, Jews living at a time it's insult.
I think of the 31st Psalm. I think it's Psalm 31. No. 150. We're saying about the wife noble, and then her husband's at the gate. Just talking. So it's
Are you talking about Proverbs 31? The
Proverbs
Woman of Valor?
31. Sorry. confusing my spots. Yeah, Proverbs 31.
We do that every week as we're bringing in Shabbat. We sing that song. We sing that proverb. Eshet kalmi imsa v'rakhov mipani mikra takbelei bala v'lo shechar ladhu tov v'lo ra o yevej v'la. I remember now. I'm on the spot. But anyway, every week you think I have it down better, but every week we sing it, and I used to have a little book I get to read it from. But it's great. It talks about the woman of valor, and everything that the family has is because of her. And I'll tell you, this is true. I have my own Ishmael. I have my wife, and before I met her, I didn't know what it was like to have money in your bank account. Even though before I met her, I was making more money than after I met her, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was impossible to live off the money that I had. And the reason why it was impossible was because I was always just blowing my money on stuff. And she came in and she's very frugal, and she says, don't go throwing your money out the window. And she domesticated me and helped me, learn how to handle money. So, but a good wife, a good woman, brings blessing to your house, brings prosperity to your house, is a blessing to your children. But the actual meaning of the proverb is really about Shabbat. It's really an allusion to Shabbat. We're talking about Shabbat. And because Shabbat is the prosperity that we get, we carry Shabbat into the weekdays with us. And it brings prosperity into the weekday, and it enlightens us. We have the Torah learning that we learn on Shabbat. But it's a really beautiful poem. And I'm not a person who's very good at understanding poetry, but there's a lot of allusions, a lot of interesting things in there. So maybe when we get to Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, if we get to sections on Proverbs and Psalms, we'll get into that a little bit.
I could see that being interesting, going through Psalms and Proverbs with you.
Right. Well, I'll be relying on lots of commentaries because I had a rabbi friend of mine who was like much better with Hebrew and everything than I was, and he said he had to use English sometimes to help him understand what it's going, because it's poetry. It's not so easy to get it, But the interesting thing is the people who are the most familiar with Psalms over here are actually the women. And if you see sometimes women waiting at bus stops, and they got a book they're reading. They're always reading Psalms. We call it the Hillel, and they just read it over and over and over again. And it's an amazing thing.
I can see that, even in America, Christian community, Psalms and Proverbs are always pushed, and I think women read the Psalms probably more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's all good. It's all good for you.
Yeah.
So good stuff. Well, anyway, I guess we should end there, and I'll just let everybody know that I'm Hillel, and this is Rick, and we're going to try to be back here again next week and continue on.
Try and get
historical survey of.
Try and get both
historical survey of the rabbi.
Left.
Go ahead.
But I was just going to say, hopefully we can get both the rabbis instead of just one.
Well, I think that I've built up enough with Rashi that I don't have to go so much backstory. And we might, maybe I'm being ambitious, but we might be able to get through all three and then get back into Genesis. However, if that's not the case, then it's Rick's fault.
Yes, I'll take the blame.
I wash my hands of it. All right. Well, Rick, it was great. It was great talking with you and learning together, and I hope you have a great week. And everybody else out there, if you have any questions, you can go to the Genesis Teacher and you can put your questions there, or the Genesis Teacher at gmail.com. You can also put them on, I think Rick's going to throw a unedited raw version of this on his website. I'm going to do an edited version just because a little bit, some of the rabbit trails. Rick was getting on to me earlier because I edited last week, so I cut a lot of stuff out.
I never watched the edited version. I just noticed the time difference between our two.
The time difference, yeah. I cut a lot of stuff, but a lot of it was actually us going, I cut a bunch out at the beginning where we were trying to get everything going for the live stream.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know, a good 10 minutes there where, you and I were both, is this working? Is that working? Anyway, so I cut out the chunks that, maybe if I cut out some stuff, maybe I'll make it like its own video so you can get to that and focus on that and get right to whatever it is you're interested in. And I meant to, so anyway, that's it. So I'm Hillel, it's Rick. We'll see you again next week at, what time is it? What's your Eastern
2
Standard?
p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
And I'm 9 o'clock Israel Standard Time. And this is our.
Is
our
that the
stream.
actual designation of your time zone?
Yeah, IST, Israel Standard Time.
Oh, cool.
Israel Standard Time, IST. It's GM plus 2. All right. See you guys later.
Thank you for tuning in into episode 2 of Old Testament Study with Hillel and Rick. I know we didn't get through any scripture, and we probably won't next week as well. We're going over the rabbis that Hillel will be referring to a lot. I know nothing about them. I doubt you will know anything about them. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But it'd be great to see your comments in the comment section if you know anything about them. So, it's been great having you all here. Hopefully, we'll catch you next week or in a couple days because I'm putting this up a bit late. So, bye for now. God bless. Love you all. Have a great and wonderful day.